and welcome to Tech Insight Podcast. Today's episode discusses the important case of Malaysian versus Watson Personal Care Store Holding Limited decided by the High Court in 2023. This case concerns transfer pricing adjustment made by the Director General of Inland Revenue under Section 140A of the Income Tax Act 1967. Throughout this discussion, we will examine the facts, legal issues, arguments of both parties, the court decision, and the implications for tax compliance and professional ethics. Before we start the discussion, I'd like to introduce our guests.
Ms. Tua as a tax expert, Ms. Lisa as Watson representative, and Ms. Hidayat as RIBM representative. Keeping the effects, as a Watson representative, could you explain what happened in this case?
Secondly, Watson Personal Care Store Malaysia Holding Limited borrowed $26.84 million from Watson Labuan in 2003 to acquire shares and subsequently borrowed another $1.267 million in 2012. The loan carried interest at LIBOR plus 3%, while the principal amount was repayable upon demand. In 2013, IRBN requested information relating to the company's cross-border related party transaction. Following its review, IRBN issued another additional assessment exceeding $4 million for the years of assessment 2010, 2011, and 2012.
Ms. Hidayat, could RIBM explain its role in this case?
Okay. The Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia is responsible for administering and enforcing the Income Tax Act 1967. Our role includes conducting tax audits, ensuring compliance with transferring price rules, and protecting government revenues. In this case, IRBM reviewed the related party transactions and raised additional assessments because it believed the transactions were not conducted according to the arm's length principle.
What were the major issues in this case?
There were three main issues. First, whether the loan transaction between Watsons and Watson Labuan complied with the arm's length principle. Second, whether Section 140A of the Income Tax Act 1967 empowered the DGIR to disregard the transaction. Third, whether substituting the interest rate with 0% was reasonable and justified. These issues become important from the tax audit and compliance perspective because related party transactions may create opportunities for profit shifting and tax avoidance, which could affect government revenue.
Let's hear the arguments presented by both parties.
Watson argued that Section 140A allows the DGIR to substitute the price of transaction to reflect arm's length principle. However, the law does not permit the complete disallowance of interest expenses without determining an appropriate arm's length price. Furthermore, IRBM failed to provide sufficient transfer pricing analysis and failed to explain why 0% interest represented an arm's length price. Therefore, Watson challenged the additional assessment raised by IRBM.
What was RIBM's position?
IRBM argued that Watsons and Watson Labuan were associated enterprises. The loan arrangement lacked commercial rationality because independent parties would normally require repayment of principal. Therefore, under Section 140A of the Income Tax Act 1967 and Rule 8 of the Income Tax Transfer Pricing Rules 2012, IRBM disregarded the arrangement and substituted the interest rate with 0%. Accordingly, the additional assessments issued were justified.
This fact had a strong argument.
In our opinion, Watson had the stronger argument. Although Section 140A empowers the DGIR to make transfer pricing adjustment, such power must be exercised based on evidence and the arm's length principle.
IRBM failed to justify why 0% interest represented an arm's length price and failed to provide adequate supporting analysis.
She explained for condition.
The High Court dismissed the record by the DGIR and upheld the decision of the Special Commissioners of Income Tax. The court held that the DGIR failed to establish that the loan arrangement was not conducted at arm's length and failed to justify the substitution of the interest rate with 0%. The court applied Section 140A, Subsection 3 of the Income Tax Act 1967 and Rule 8, Subsection 2 of the Income Tax Transfer Pricing Rules 2012. This provision requires transfer pricing agency to reflect what independent parties dealing at arm's length could have agreed. In my opinion, the decision is consistent with the objective of Malaysian tax law because it promotes fairness, certainty, and proper administration.
Now, Mr. Wu, what is the tax related from this case?
These cases demonstrate that transfer pricing audits involving related party cross-border transactions are becoming increasingly important. It is also likely to influence future tax investigations involving multinational groups because IRBM may conduct more rigorous reviews of related party transactions. Therefore, proper documentation and record keeping are essential because they provide evidence to support transactions to be tax audits and reduce the risk of disputes.
Besides legal issues, are there any ethical concerns?
Yes, the ethical dilemma in this case is balancing the government duty to protect tax revenue with the taxpayers' right to fair treatment. The stakeholders involved include say, IRM, the government, society, and other taxpayers. If taxpayers manipulate transaction, public revenue may be reduced. On the other hand, if tax authorities act without sufficient justification, public confidence in the tax system may be affected. Therefore, fairness, transparency, and accountability are essential.
This is what the compliance strategy should taxpayer adopt. Taxpayers should maintain contact record under Section 82 of the Tax Act 1967, record transfer pricing documentation, seek professional advice, and ensure that related party transaction comply with the arm's length principle. If done, what happens if taxpayer fails to comply?
Failure to comply with tax laws may result in additional assessments, penalties, litigation costs, and reputational damage. From an ethical perspective, non-compliance undermines integrity, accountability, and public trust.
As a tax expert, could you provide some recommendation with
A practical example is that multinational companies should prepare transfer pricing report and maintain sufficient supporting opinion to prove that their related party transactions reflect economic success and compliance with arm's length principle. Good tax government and professional ethics promote sustainable tax compliance and minimize dispute with IRBM.
In conclusion, the case of Malaysia versus Watson Personal Gas Stores Holding Limited highlight the importance of the arm's length principle, proper transfer pricing, documentation, and professional ethics. They also demonstrate that both taxpayer and tax authority must act fairly and responsibly to maintain public confidence in the Malaysian tax system. Thank you for listening to Tech Insight Podcast.